Elena Vance navigated the Zenith Heights Hotel's glittering tech summit like a ghost, her black waitress uniform rendering her practically invisible to Silicon Valley's elite who were too busy discussing algorithm breakthroughs to notice the hands refilling their champagne. She was just the help, keeping her head down and her grandfather's botanical secrets tucked safely in her heart. But when she greeted the silent, elderly Don Alfonso Vega in a melodic Nahuatl-infused dialect from a forgotten Oaxacan valley, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The old man's fork clattered to the floor, his weathered face frozen in an expression that looked almost like he'd seen a ghost, because that accent, those exact words, shouldn't have been possible for a young black woman from Oakland to know. In that single moment, decades of buried history, a grandfather's hidden legacy, and the shocking connection between a humble garden and a billion-dollar empire began to surface, and Elena's world was about to collide with forces that would reveal she was never just a waitress at all. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The glass-walled ballroom of the Zenith Heights Hotel shimmered with the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above polished marble floors, their light catching on champagne flutes and the sleek surfaces of smartphones worth more than most people's monthly rent. The air buzzed with conversations about artificial intelligence, venture capital, and disruption, Silicon Valley's favorite language. Men in tailored suits and women in designer gowns moved through the space with the practiced ease of people who belonged in rooms like this, their laughter floating above the soft jazz quartet playing in the corner. Elena Vance adjusted the white cloth draped over her forearm, her fingers smoothing an invisible wrinkle that probably didn't exist. At 23, she'd worked enough high-end events to know the rules. Eyes down, movements efficient, smile polite but forgettable. She was good at being invisible. Maybe too good. The tray in her hands held appetizers that cost more than her entire week's groceries, delicate arrangements of caviar and microgreens that looked more like art installations than food. Her black uniform was crisp and anonymous, the kind that helped her blend into the background of these glittering events. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver pendant tucked beneath her collar, a gift from her grandfather before he passed. Everything about Elena's appearance suggested someone who knew her place in these spaces, quiet, unassuming, forgettable. But tonight, her mind kept drifting somewhere else. Back to Oakland, to the small community garden wedged between abandoned warehouses and chain-link fences. Back to the foreclosure notice she'd found taped to the garden gate 3 days ago, stamped with the logo of Vega Global Development. Back to the purple corn stalks her grandfather had planted decades ago, somehow still thriving in soil that shouldn't support anything. She moved through the crowd with practiced precision, offering appetizers to clusters of tech moguls who discussed valuations and market disruption without ever acknowledging her presence. It was like being a ghost, she thought. Visible enough to do the job, invisible enough to be forgotten the moment she walked away. Near the far wall, beneath a massive abstract painting that probably cost more than her entire apartment building, Elena noticed something unusual. A table set slightly apart from the others, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who weren't eating or drinking, just watching. Security detail, she realized. Private security for someone important enough to need protection even here, among the so-called elite. At the center of the table sat an elderly man, his posture rigid despite his age. Don Alfonso Vega. Elena had overheard the other servers whispering about him. The legendary father of Julian Vega, the billionaire CEO of Vega Global. At 88, Don Alfonso was supposedly the silent force behind the empire, though he rarely appeared in public anymore. Rumors said he'd stopped speaking months ago, some kind of cognitive decline that his family kept carefully hidden from the press. The old man stared at his plate with visible disdain, his weathered hands resting motionless on the white tablecloth. The food before him, some kind of molecular gastronomy creation that probably had a French name Elena couldn't pronounce, sat untouched. Next to him, a younger man in an expensive charcoal suit leaned close, speaking in low, urgent tones. Julian Vega, Elena guessed. The billionaire's son trying desperately to impress a father who seemed to have checked out of this glittering world entirely. Elena shouldn't approach that table. The security presence alone suggested these people didn't want to be bothered by the help. But as she moved past, something caught her eye, a small detail so unexpected it made her pause mid-step. Tucked into Don Alfonso's breast pocket, barely visible against the dark fabric of his suit, was a dried corn husk. Not decorative, not styled. Just a simple, weathered piece of dried plant matter that looked completely out of place in this temple of technology and wealth. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Her grandfather used to keep corn husks in his pockets too, calling them reminders of what matters. She'd always thought it was just one of his quirks, another piece of the gentle eccentricity that made him seem out of step with the modern world. Before she could think better of it, before the rational part of her brain could remind her that she was just the waitress and these people were untouchable, Elena found herself drifting toward the table. The security guards shifted slightly, their attention focusing on her, but she kept her movements slow and non-threatening. Just clearing a glass. Just doing her job. She reached for an empty water glass near Don Alfonso's elbow, and then, almost without deciding to do it, she leaned in slightly and spoke. Not in English. Not in the standard Spanish she'd learned in high school. But in the melodic, rhythmic dialect her grandfather had taught her as a child, the one he'd used every morning when he tended his plants, the one that hummed with sounds that didn't quite exist in any language she'd studied since. Ti penolsha, tlatsin? Kenk amo tlakua in tvaltapaktlai. The words felt strange on her tongue, old, weighted with meaning she'd never fully understood. Her grandfather had told her they meant something like, "Are you passing through, honored uncle? Why do you not eat the gifts of the earth?" But the translation never quite captured the texture of it, the way the syllables rolled with the rhythm of wind through corn stalks. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Don Alfonso's fork hit the floor. The metallic clang echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, impossibly loud in the sophisticated murmur of the gala. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned. The jazz quartet faltered for half a measure. The old man's head snapped up, his eyes, cloudy with age but suddenly, shockingly alert, locked onto Elena's face with an intensity that made her breath catch. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trembling. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. No, Elena realized with a chill running down her spine, he looked like he'd heard one. Julian Vega was on his feet instantly, his chair scraping back with a harsh sound. "What did you just say to him?" His voice was sharp, protective, edged with something that might have been fear. "Security." But Don Alfonso raised one trembling hand, and the entire room seemed to freeze. His lips moved, forming words in a voice that sounded rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper that somehow carried across the sudden silence. "Tlatsin George," he breathed. "The Black Angel. You speak as he did." Elena's tray slipped from her nerveless fingers, appetizers scattering across the pristine marble floor like fallen stars. She had absolutely no idea what she just set in motion. The security guards moved like shadows in expensive suits, flanking Elena before she could even process what was happening. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with an earpiece and the kind of blank expression that suggested he'd seen everything, placed a firm hand on her elbow. "Miss, you need to come with us." It wasn't a request. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Around her, the gala had erupted into barely contained chaos, whispered conversations rippling through the crowd like wind through grass, phones appearing as guests tried to capture whatever scandal was unfolding, the quartet still playing but nobody listening anymore. I didn't mean to," Elena stammered, her mind racing. She'd just been trying to be kind, to acknowledge the old man's obvious discomfort. How had a simple greeting turned into this? Julian Vega stood frozen beside his father, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was younger than Elena had initially thought, maybe late 30s, with the kind of sharp, angular features that photographs well and the cold eyes of someone who'd built an empire by never showing weakness. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Elena's entire year's rent, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money, not even for a second. "Take her to the Astor room," Julian said, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed instantly. and get my father's physician. Now. But Don Alfonso was shaking his head, his trembling hands still raised. No, he rasped, the words seeming to cost him tremendous effort. No physician. I am not. He paused, searching for words in a voice that sounded like it was remembering how to work. I'm not ill. I am remembering. Father, you haven't spoken in 3 months, Julian said, and Elena caught something beneath the anger in his voice. Fear, maybe, or desperation. You need to. I need to speak to her. Don Alfonso's eyes never left Elena's face. The girl who knows the old words. The impossible girl. Elena felt like she'd stepped into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The old man was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, like he could see straight through her black uniform and into whatever secrets she carried without even knowing it. Sir, I'm so sorry if I offended, she began, but Julian cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't apologize to him. Explain to me. He turned to the security guards. The Astor room. And clear this area. I don't want anyone overhearing this conversation. The guards steered Elena toward a side door, and she had no choice but to go, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. She caught glimpses of the other servers, her co-workers, watching with wide eyes as she was escorted away like some kind of criminal. Maria, the catering supervisor, looked absolutely horrified. Elena was definitely getting fired after this. The Astor room turned out to be a private lounge tucked away from the main ballroom, all dark wood paneling and leather furniture that smelled like old money and privilege. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering San Francisco skyline, the city spread out below like a constellation of lights. It was the kind of room where deals worth millions probably got made over scotch and handshakes. The guards deposited Elena in a leather armchair and took positions by the door, blocking her exit. Moments later, Julian Vega strode in, Don Alfonso moving more slowly behind him, leaning on a cane Elena hadn't noticed before. The old man looked frielier away from the table, but his eyes were still sharp, still watching her with that unsettling recognition. Julian closed the door with a controlled click that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd slammed it. He turned to face Elena, and she saw his jaw was tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. He was angry. No, he was furious, but keeping it locked down beneath layers of expensive education and boardroom discipline. I'm going to ask you once, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. Who sent you? Elena blinked. I what? Nobody sent me. I'm just a server. I work for Prestige Catering. We were hired for the event. Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. Julian moved closer, and Elena instinctively pressed back into the leather chair. He loomed over her, all white-collar intensity and barely restrained fury, and she suddenly understood why this man had built an empire before he was 40. He was terrifying when he wanted to be. My father hasn't spoken in 3 months, Julian continued, each word precisely enunciated. He's been declining rapidly. Early-stage dementia, according to his doctors. He barely recognizes family members anymore. And then you, a waitress I've never seen before, appear out of nowhere and speak to him in some dialect that makes him suddenly coherent? That's not a coincidence. That's manipulation. I wasn't manipulating anyone. Elena's voice came out higher than she intended, fear mixing with indignation. I saw the corn husk in his pocket and my grandfather used to keep them too, and the words just came out. They're just words my grandfather taught me when I was little. I didn't think. Your grandfather. Julian's eyes narrowed. How convenient. And what else did this grandfather teach you? How to research elderly billionaires. How to exploit cognitive decline for financial gain. Which competitor hired you? Maxfield? Torrance Industries. Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was accusing her of. Corporate espionage? She could barely afford her rent, worked 3 different catering jobs to keep her grandfather's garden alive, and this man thought she was some kind of sophisticated spy? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, hearing her voice shake and hating it. I don't work for any company. I'm just a server, and I'm also a botanist, or trying to be. I'm taking classes when I can afford them, and I help maintain a community garden in Oakland, and that's it. That's my whole life. A garden in Oakland. Something flickered across Julian's face. Recognition? Where in Oakland? The East District. Near the old rail yards. Elena didn't understand why that mattered, but something in his expression made her stomach drop. Why? Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course that's where you'd be from. He turned away, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and when he looked back at her, his eyes were cold as winter. Do you know what Vega Global is about to do in the East District, Miss? Vance. Elena Vance. The name hit the room like a physical thing. Don Alfonso made a sound, half gasp, half sob, and gripped his cane so hard his knuckles went white. Vance, Julian repeated slowly. Your last name is Vance. Yes, why does that? Because that's impossible, the old man whispered. His accent was thick now, the careful American pronunciation he'd probably spent decades perfecting slipping away. George Vance had no children. No family. He told us he was alone in the world. Elena felt cold wash through her. You knew my grandfather? We're breaking ground in 3 weeks, Julian said, ignoring her question, his voice taking on a cruel edge. The East District redevelopment project. Vega Global is demolishing everything within a 6-block radius, including whatever garden you think you're protecting. We've already acquired all the necessary permits. It's a done deal. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The foreclosure notice. Vega Global. This man, this cold, furious billionaire standing in front of her, was the one trying to destroy her grandfather's legacy. The irony of it was almost funny, if funny meant soul-crushing. You can't, she breathed. That garden it's all I have left of him. Those plants, some of them are decades old, they're in the way of progress, Julian said flatly. And nothing you say or do is going to change that. He turned to his father. We're done here. Security will escort Miss Vance out, and if she comes within 100 feet of you again, we'll file for a restraining order. No. Don Alfonso's voice was stronger now, carrying an authority that made even Julian pause. We are not done. You will sit down, Julian. And you will listen. Because this girl, this impossible girl who speaks with George's voice, she has answers I have waited 70 years to hear. The old man's eyes locked onto Elena's, and she saw tears gathering there, making the weathered brown eyes shine like polished stones. Tell me, child, he said softly. Tell me how a black girl from Oakland learned to speak the language of a forgotten village in Oaxaca. Tell me how you carry the voice of a ghost. Chapter 3, The Interrogation of Identity. Julian didn't sit down. He stood rigid by the window, arms crossed over his chest, every line of his body radiating hostility. But he stopped talking, and in the suffocating silence of the Astor room, that felt like a concession. Elena's hands twisted in her lap, her fingers finding the hidden pendant beneath her uniform collar. She didn't know what to say, didn't understand what any of this meant, but the old man was looking at her with such desperate hope that she couldn't stay silent. I don't know anything about a village in Oaxaca, she began carefully. My grandfather, George Vance, he raised me after my mom died. I was 6. He never talked much about his past, just that he used to be a scientist, something to do with agriculture and soil. We lived in Oakland, in a tiny house near the old gardens. A scientist, Don Alfonso breathed. Yes, he was brilliant. The most brilliant man I ever met, and I have met many in my years. Julian made a sharp sound of disbelief, but the old man ignored him. Go on, child. He taught me about plants, Elena continued, the words coming easier now as she sank into familiar memories. How to read soil, how to understand what each plant needed. We had this little plot. It wasn't much, just an urban garden between abandoned buildings, but he treated it like it was sacred. Every morning he'd walk among the corn stalks and speak in that language. The one I used tonight. She paused, remembering her grandfather's weathered hands in the dirt, the way the morning light would catch the purple silk of the corn tassels. I asked him once what the words meant. He said it was a way of showing respect. That the earth gives us everything, and the least we can do is thank her properly. He made me practice the greeting until I could say it exactly right. The rhythm, the tone, everything. Said it was important to preserve things that were being forgotten. He never told you where he learned it? Don Alfonso leaned forward, his cane forgotten. No. I just thought. Elena felt foolish saying it out loud. I thought maybe he'd picked it up from books or something. He had shelves and shelves of old agricultural journals, stuff about indigenous farming practices. I didn't know it was personal. Julian finally moved, pushing away from the window with barely controlled aggression. This is insane. Father, you can't possibly believe. Be quiet, Julian. The old man's voice carried a steel Elena hadn't heard before. For once in your life, be quiet and listen to something that matters more than your profit margins. The billionaire's jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Elena saw something flash across his face, hurt, maybe, beneath the anger. The dynamic between father and son was clearly complicated, fraught with old tensions she couldn't begin to understand. Don Alfonso turned back to Elena, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. Your grandfather saved my life. Saved my entire village. I was 8 years old when he arrived, and we were starving. The corn had failed for the second year, some kind of blight we'd never seen before. The government sent no help. We were too small, too remote, too indigenous to matter to anyone. He paused, his eyes distant, seeing something that happened 70 years ago. And then a black man appeared on the mountain road, carrying a satchel and speaking broken Spanish with an accent that made the children laugh. George Vance. He had fled north from the American South. He told me later that he couldn't bear the hatred anymore, couldn't stomach watching brilliant minds destroyed because of the color of their skin. He wanted to disappear, to find peace somewhere the world would leave him alone. Elena felt tears prickling her eyes. Her grandfather had never mentioned any of this. Never said a word about Mexico, about saving anyone, about running from racism so brutal it drove him to another country entirely. George didn't just bring science, Don Alfonso continued, his voice thick with emotion. He brought hope. He analyzed our soil, understood what the blight was doing, and he had seeds, purple corn seeds he'd been developing, resistant to the exact disease killing our crops. Within 3 months, we had food again. Within a year, we had surplus to trade. The old man's hands trembled on his cane. My sister, my baby sister Lucia, she was dying of malnutrition. George made her corn porridge with his own hands, fed her every day until color came back to her cheeks. He saved her. He saved all of us. Julian was staring at his father with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something that might have been grief. And the language? Elena asked quietly. The greeting I used? It was how we thanked the earth, Don Alfonso said. An old practice, older than the Spanish conquest, passed down in our village for generations. When George learned it, he wept. He said it reminded him that not everything beautiful had been destroyed by cruelty. He made us promise to keep speaking it, to never let it die. The old man's voice broke. But of course it did die. The young people left for cities. The old ways were forgotten. I thought I was the last one who remembered those words. And then tonight, I heard them again, in the voice of a granddaughter George claimed he never had. The accusation hung in the air, gentle but unmistakable. Elena shook her head. I'm not lying. I'm his granddaughter. My mother was his daughter. She died when I was little, and he never talked about her much. It hurt him too badly. But I'm his blood, I swear. Perhaps he remarried, Don Alfonso mused. Perhaps he built a new life in America after he left us. It would have been like him to keep it quiet, to protect those he loved from a past he wanted to leave behind. When did he leave? Elena asked. When did he leave your village? 1961. 5 years after he arrived. He said. The old man hesitated, pain crossing his weathered features. He said men from the American government had found him, that they wanted him to return, to work on agricultural projects for them. He didn't want to go, but they made it clear it wasn't a choice. We never heard from him again. Julian, who'd been silent during his father's story, suddenly spoke up. This doesn't change anything. His voice was hard, defensive. Even if the story is true, and that's a massive if, it has nothing to do with the current situation. The East District development is happening. Period. Elena's head snapped up. In the emotional weight of Don Alfonso's tale, she'd almost forgotten about the demolition, about the garden that was about to be destroyed. The reminder hit like ice water. You can't, she said again, but with more force this time. Those plants, some of the corn in that garden came directly from my grandfather's original seeds. They're the same strain you're talking about, the purple Oaxacan grain. If you bulldoze that garden, you'll destroy something irreplaceable. Everything is replaceable, Julian said coldly. That's what progress means. And Vega Global has invested $40 million into that development. We have investors, timelines, contracts. I'm not stopping a project of that magnitude because of some sentimental story about corn. Julian, Don Alfonso started, but his son cut him off. No, father. I've listened to your story. It's touching, it really is. But it's also ancient history. This is business. This is the real world, not some fairy tale about magical seeds and grateful villagers. He turned to Elena, and she saw no sympathy in his eyes, no softening from his father's revelations. Here's what's going to happen, Julian said with cold precision. You're going to leave this event. You're going to go home to your garden and start making arrangements to relocate your plants, because in 3 weeks, that entire area is going to be rubble. If you try to contact my father again, if you try to use this story to manipulate him or interfere with Vega Global's operations, I will bury you in legal paperwork so deep you'll spend the next decade in court. Elena stood, her legs shaky but her voice steady. My grandfather saved your father's life. Saved his entire village. And you're going to destroy his legacy as a thank you. I'm going to build something that provides housing for 5,000 people and creates 2,000 jobs, Julian countered. Your grandfather did a good thing 70 years ago. That doesn't give you the right to stand in the way of progress. Progress? Elena tasted the word like ash. Is that what you call it when you bulldoze communities? When you erase history? My grandfather spent his whole life preserving things. Preserving knowledge, preserving seeds, preserving the old ways so they wouldn't be lost. And you're just going to wipe it all away because it's inconvenient for your profit margin. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered in Julian Vega's eyes. That may be, or shame. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried under layers of corporate armor. Security will show you out, he said, turning away. Dismissing her. Don Alfonso struggled to his feet, his cane scraping against the hardwood floor. This isn't over, Julian. That girl carries George's legacy, and you will not. It's fine, Elena interrupted quietly. She felt hollowed out, exhausted, and suddenly desperate to escape this suffocating room with its leather furniture and its view of a city that had no place for people like her. I'll go. She walked toward the door, the security guards parting to let her pass. But at the threshold, she turned back. You know what the saddest part is? She said, looking directly at Julian. You're so busy building your empire that you've forgotten where it came from. Your father knows. He remembers what it means to be saved by kindness, to be lifted up when the world has abandoned you. But you... She shook her head. You've become exactly the kind of person your father fled from all those years ago. She left before he could respond, walking out into the glittering hallway with her head held high, even as her world crumbled around her. Behind her, in the Astor room, Don Alfonso sank back into his chair and spoke to his son in a voice heavy with disappointment. You have made a terrible mistake tonight, mi hijo. That girl holds more power than you know. And when you realize what you're truly destroying, it will be too late. But Julian Vega was already pulling out his phone, already moving on to the next crisis, the next deal. He had no idea how right his father was. Elena made it halfway across the hotel lobby before the voice stopped her. Miss Vance, please, wait. She turned to find Don Alfonso moving toward her, his cane tapping against the marble with surprising speed. One of the security guards hovered nearby, looking uncertain, but the old man waved him off with an imperious gesture. I must speak with you, Don Alfonso said, slightly breathless. Not here. Somewhere private. Somewhere my son cannot interfere. Elena should have said no. Should have walked away from this entire surreal evening and never looked back. But the desperation in the old man's eyes held her in place. "There's a courtyard garden," she said quietly. "Through those doors. The catering staff use it for breaks." Don Alfonso nodded, and together they made their way through the service entrance, leaving behind the glittering world of the gala for a small, enclosed space filled with potted plants and wrought iron benches. The night air was cool against Elena's skin, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and car exhaust, the peculiar perfume of the city. The old man settled onto a bench with a sigh of relief, and Elena sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the gala filtered through the walls, muffled music, distant laughter, the clinking of glasses celebrating wealth and success. "I need to tell you the whole story," Don Alfonso finally said. "Not the abbreviated version I gave my son. The truth of what George Vance meant to my people. To me." Elena nodded, her throat tight. "It was 1956, the old man began, his eyes growing distant. "The year the corn died. Our village, San Miguel de las Sombras, sat in a valley so remote that government officials forgot we existed. We were Mixtec and Zapotec descendants, speaking Spanish poorly and our ancestral languages better. We grew corn the way our ancestors had for 1,000 years, in the old way with the old seeds." His weathered hands gripped the cane, knuckles pale in the courtyard lights. "But that year, something came. A blight we'd never seen. The stalks turned black from the inside out, crumbling like ash. By August, 90% of our crop was gone. By September, children were dying." Elena felt her breath catch. Her grandfather had never mentioned this. Never said a word about starving children or failed crops. "I was 8 years old," Don Alfonso continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My little sister Lucia was 4. She stopped walking first, too weak, too hungry. Then she stopped talking. My mother would hold her for hours, rocking her, singing the old songs, but Lucia's eyes were empty. Hollow. She was fading away, and we all knew it." A tear tracked down the old man's weathered cheek. "The government sent inspectors once. They looked at our blackened fields, at our dying children, and they shrugged. 'Relocate,' they said. 'Leave your land and move to the cities. There's no future in this valley.' As if our ancestors hadn't tended this soil for centuries. As if we could just abandon everything and start over with nothing." He paused, drawing a shaky breath. And then one morning in October, a black man appeared on the mountain road. Tall, thin, carrying a battered leather satchel and wearing clothes that had seen better days. He spoke Spanish with an accent that made him sound like he was singing, and his eyes. Don Alfonso smiled through his tears. His eyes carried such sadness. Such deep, bone-weary sadness. "My grandfather," Elena whispered. George Vance introduced himself to the village elder as a scientist who'd worked with agriculture in the American South. He didn't tell us then that he was fleeing, that he'd left everything behind because the racism had become unbearable. We learned that later, in pieces, during long conversations over cornmeal and coffee. The old man's voice grew stronger, animated by memory. He asked to see our fields, and when he walked among the blackened stalks, he wept. Actually wept. He knelt in the dirt and let it run through his fingers, and then he said something I'll never forget. "The earth is not dead. She's just sick. And I know how to heal her." Don Alfonso leaned forward, his eyes bright with the intensity of the memory. George had seeds. Purple corn seeds he'd been developing for years, a variety resistant to the exact fungal blight killing our crops. But more than that, he had knowledge. He taught us about soil pH, about companion planting, about natural pest control. He didn't just give us fish, he taught us to fish in ways our ancestors would have recognized and approved. Within weeks, we had small shoots coming up. Within 2 months, we had young stalks. George worked alongside us every day, his hands in the dirt from sunrise to sunset. He learned our language, both Spanish and the old dialect. He participated in our ceremonies. He became one of us. The old man's hands trembled on his cane. And he saved Lucia. made corn porridge with his own hands, using the first harvest from his purple seeds, fed her every morning and every evening, speaking to her in the old language, teaching her the words of gratitude to the earth. Within 3 weeks, she was walking again. Within 2 months, she was running through the fields, laughing. Don Alfonso wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The dialect you spoke tonight, T penolsha, Tlatsin? Kenk amo tlakua in Tlaltepactli. Those were the exact words George taught us to say before every meal. A blessing. A thank you. He said it was important to remember that food isn't just fuel, it's a gift from the earth, and we should honor that gift. Elena felt tears streaming down her own face now. He made me say it every morning in the garden. I never knew why it mattered so much to him. Because it was all he had left of us, Don Alfonso said softly. When the American government came for him in 1961, when they forced him to return, he took nothing but his seeds and his memories. He must have kept the language alive through you, passing it on so it wouldn't die completely. The old man reached out and took Elena's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Your grandfather was a hero, Miss Vance. Not the kind they build statues for, but the kind that matters more. He saw people suffering and used his gifts to help, asking nothing in return. He gave us life when the world had abandoned us. Why didn't he ever tell me? Elena's voice broke. Why didn't he say anything about you, about the village, about any of this? Pain, perhaps, Don Alfonso suggested gently. Or protection. If he was fleeing racism in America, if the government forced his return, maybe he wanted to keep his Mexican life separate. Keep it safe from whatever darkness he'd escaped. The old man squeezed her hand. But he kept the language alive. He taught you the old ways. That means something. That means he never forgot us, never stopped honoring what we shared. Elena looked down at their joined hands, hers young and calloused from garden work, his aged and spotted but still vital, and felt the weight of history pressing down. Your son is going to destroy everything my grandfather built, she said quietly. The garden where his seeds still grow. The legacy he left behind. Don Alfonso's jaw tightened. My son has forgotten where he comes from. Forgotten that wealth built on the suffering of others is no wealth at all. But I have not forgotten. And I will not let George Vance's legacy die without a fight. The old man stood, leaning heavily on his cane, and looked down at Elena with fierce determination. Go home, child. Go to your garden and look carefully at what your grandfather left you. I suspect you'll find there's more there than you realize. And when you do, come find me. Because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Elena's apartment was a tiny studio in a building that had been charming about 40 years ago and was now just old. The radiator clanked, the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments, and the kitchen was barely large enough to turn around in. But it was hers, paid for with catering wages and the occasional tutoring gig, and the window faced east so morning light filled the space with warmth. She stumbled through the door just after midnight, exhausted and emotionally wrung out. Her uniform reeked of expensive perfume and kitchen grease, the peculiar smell of serving the wealthy. She peeled it off and stood in her small bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the cracked sink. Who were you, Grandpa? She whispered to the empty room. What else didn't you tell me? Sleep was impossible. Elena lay in bed for an hour, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events until they blurred into surreal imagery. Finally, she gave up, pulled on jeans and an old sweatshirt, and grabbed her keys. The garden was a 15-minute walk from her apartment, through streets that got progressively emptier and more industrial. This part of Oakland had been forgotten by the city's tech boom. No trendy cafes here, no renovated lofts, just warehouses with broken windows and vacant lots where buildings used to stand. But nestled between two abandoned factories, surrounded by chain-link fence that Elena had reinforced herself, was a quarter-acre of green that shouldn't exist. Her grandfather's garden. Their garden. Elena unlocked the gate and stepped into a different world. Even in the darkness, illuminated only by distant streetlights and the moon overhead, the garden thrived. Corn stalks rose in neat rows, their leaves rustling in the night breeze. Tomato plants climbed wire frames. Squash vines sprawled across careful mounds. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, the purple corn her grandfather had planted decades ago, its silk catching moonlight like spun silver. This was her sanctuary. The place where the city's noise faded and she could hear herself think. The place where her grandfather's presence still felt real, tangible in the soil and the seeds and the careful arrangement of each plant. Elena walked to the small shed at the garden's center, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but weatherproof and sturdy. Inside, her grandfather had kept his tools, his seed collections, his notebooks. She'd been through most of it after he died, organizing and cataloging, but she'd never looked deeply. It had hurt too much, like prying into private spaces he'd never explicitly shared. But tonight, Don Alfonso's story echoed in her mind. George Vance had secrets. Important ones. Elena lit the camping lantern that hung from a ceiling hook, filling the shed with warm light. The familiar space appeared around her, shelves of labeled seed jars, hand tools hanging from pegs, stacks of agricultural journals dating back to the 1950s. And in the corner, her grandfather's old desk, its surface scarred and stained from years of use. She'd cleaned out the desk drawers after he passed, or thought she had. Old pens, seed catalogs, receipts from garden supply stores. Nothing remarkable. But as Elena ran her hands along the desk's underside, her fingers caught on something. A slight irregularity in the wood grain. A hidden compartment. Of course. Her grandfather had been a scientist, methodical and careful. If he'd wanted to hide something important, he would have done it properly. Elena found a thin screwdriver and worked it into the nearly invisible seam. With a soft click, a shallow drawer popped free from the desk's underside. Inside lay 3 weathered leather journals and a small cloth pouch that jingled softly when she picked it up. Her hands trembled as she opened the first journal. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the pages, precise, scientific notation mixed with personal observations. The date started in 1954. June 12, 1954. Have decided I cannot remain in Georgia. The university has made it clear that my research will never receive proper credit, that my name will always be footnoted beneath white colleagues who contributed less. Johnson's comments today about knowing my place were the final straw. I am a scientist, not a supplicant. If America will not allow me to practice science with dignity, I will find somewhere that will. Elena's breath caught. She'd known her grandfather faced racism, it was impossible not to in his generation, but she'd never known the full extent, never understood what it had cost him. She flipped through pages documenting his journey south, through Texas and into Mexico. His Spanish improved with each entry, phonetic spellings giving way to fluency. And then, October 1956. October 8, 1956. Have reached a village called San Miguel de las Sombras. The people here are dying. A fungal blight has destroyed their corn, and the government offers no assistance. I cannot leave. The children's faces haunt me, hollow-eyed, starving. I have seeds that might help. Z-maize variant I've been developing for blight resistance. If it works here, if I can save even one child, perhaps my exile will have purpose. Page after page documented the village's recovery. Soil tests. Growth measurements. Detailed observations of the purple corn's resistance to the blight. But interspersed with the science were personal notes that made Elena's heart ache. November 3, 1956. The elder's daughter, Lucia, took her first steps unaided today. Her brother Alfonso, bright boy, asks endless questions about the soil, wept with joy. I find myself weeping too, though I'm not certain why. Perhaps because here, in this forgotten valley, my work finally matters. These people don't care about my skin color. They care that I can help their children live. Alfonso. The same Alfonso who now sat in boardrooms and attended tech galas. The same little boy who'd asked endless questions. Elena continued reading, losing herself in her grandfather's careful documentation. The purple corn wasn't just blight-resistant, it was a marvel of natural selection and careful breeding. Her grandfather had spent years developing it, combining drought-resistant varieties with high-nutrient strains, creating something that could thrive in marginal soil with minimal water. Then she reached an entry from 1961 that made her blood run cold. April 2, 1961. They have found me. 2 men from the USDA, accompanied by someone from State Department. They know about my research about the seeds. They're calling it vital to national security, claiming my developments in drought-resistant grain could help combat Soviet agricultural advantages. It's a lie wrapped in patriotism. They want to control my work, patent it, profit from it. I've refused, told them the seeds belong to the people of San Miguel, that I developed them here with their knowledge and their faith. The men were not pleased. They've given me 1 week to voluntarily return to the United States, or they'll revoke my passport and charge me with, I don't even know what. Treason? Theft of intellectual property I created with my own hands. The next entry was dated a week later. April 9, 1961. I leave tomorrow. There was no choice, they made that clear. But I've hidden seeds throughout the village, taught the people how to preserve them, how to keep the strain pure. And I've filed papers in Mexico City, people's patent, that names the village and any future heirs of my blood as the sole guardians of this variety. The Americans cannot touch it legally, though I doubt that will stop them from trying. I am taking a portion of the seeds with me. Perhaps in America, I can continue the work quietly, in obscurity, where the government won't bother looking. Perhaps I can build something they cannot steal. Elena set down the journal with shaking hands. Her grandfather hadn't just fled racism, he'd fled government appropriation of his life's work. And he'd protected it the only way he could, by scattering it across borders and burying it in legal protections. She reached for the cloth pouch, loosening the drawstring. Seeds spilled into her palm, deep purple kernels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They were larger than modern corn seeds, each one unique, and when Elena held them up to the lantern, she could see subtle variations in color and texture. These were the original seeds. The pure strain her grandfather had developed. The same seeds that had saved a village and that he'd risked everything to protect. Elena pulled out the second journal and found detailed growing instructions, genetic lineage charts, and, most importantly, copies of the legal documents her grandfather had filed in Mexico. The people's patent, naming George Vance and his legitimate heirs in perpetuity as the sole guardians of Z. May's variant, Oaxacan purple. The third journal was different. Personal. It contained letters he'd never sent, addressed to people in San Miguel. To Alfonso. To Lucia. To the village elder. Letters filled with love and regret and hope that someday, somehow, the seeds would matter again. The final page held a letter addressed to Elena herself, written just months before his death. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I am gone, and you found my greatest secret. Forgive an old man for keeping so much hidden. I wanted to protect you from the burden of this legacy, from the attention it might bring. But I also could not let it die. Those seeds in the garden, the purple corn you've tended so carefully, they are more than plants. They are hope. They are proof that one person, armed with knowledge and compassion, can save lives. Keep them safe, my girl. Keep them growing. The world will need them someday, sooner than you think. And when that day comes, remember, you are not just a gardener. You are a guardian of something precious. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. With all my love, Grandpa. Elena sat in the quiet shed, surrounded by her grandfather's carefully preserved legacy, and understood for the first time the full weight of what she'd inherited. She wasn't just protecting a garden. She was protecting a miracle. And Julian Vega had just declared war on it. 300 miles south in Vega Global's sleek headquarters, Julian Vega stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley's nighttime sprawl. His reflection in the glass looked haggard, tie loosened, hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. It was 3 a.m, and he hadn't left his office since returning from the gala. Behind him, spread across his desk, lay the quarterly reports he'd been avoiding. Red numbers. Declining projections. The kind of financial hemorrhaging that made shareholders nervous and board members sharpen their knives. The Agritech division, his pet project, the initiative that was supposed to revolutionize farming and cement Vega Global's dominance in sustainable technology, was failing spectacularly. Sir? His assistant, Marcus, appeared in the doorway holding yet another coffee. The man was loyal to a fault, staying through the night without complaint. The team from development is here. Julian turned from the window. Send them in. 3 executives filed into the office, their exhaustion matching his own. Dr. Sarah Chin, head of the Agri-Tech division, looked particularly grim. Show me, Julian said without preamble. Sarah connected her laptop to the wall screen, and graphs appeared, all of them trending downward. The GV series bioengineered grain is failing in field tests. We've tried 6 different soil conditions, 8 climate scenarios, and the results are consistent. Poor germination rates, weak stalks, minimal yield. It's not viable for commercial production. Julian's jaw tightened. They'd spent 3 years and $80 million developing this grain. It was supposed to be drought-resistant, high-yield, the answer to farming in degraded soil. It was supposed to save Vega Global's reputation after their last product launch had been an environmental disaster. What's the problem? He demanded. We used the best genetic engineering available. We had top scientists. That's just it, Sarah interrupted, pulling up a new slide. We've been approaching this wrong. Genetic engineering can only do so much. What we needed was a naturally evolved variant, something that adapted over generations rather than being forced in a lab. She clicked to another slide showing an image of purple corn. This is what we should have been looking for. An heirloom variety with natural resistance to drought and blight, developed through traditional breeding methods over decades. But varieties like this are extinct, wiped out by industrial monoculture farming. Julian stared at the purple kernels on screen, and something cold slithered through his gut. How extinct? He asked slowly. Completely, Sarah said. We've searched seed banks worldwide. There are references to various indigenous varieties from Oaxaca and other regions, but no actual specimens. They're gone. Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. Sir, about the Oakland project? Julian's head snapped around. What about it? Well, the surveyors filed their final report this afternoon. Before demolition, they cataloged all structures and significant vegetation on site. And Marcus pulled up a tablet, tapping through screens. There's an urban garden in the demolition zone. Quarter-acre plot. The surveyors noted unusual crop varieties, including what appears to be purple corn of unknown origin. The room went very quiet. Julian crossed to Marcus and took the tablet, staring at the survey photos. There it was, Elena Vance's garden, photographed in afternoon sunlight. Rows of healthy plants. And in the center, unmistakable purple corn stalks heavy with mature ears. Dr. Chen, Julian said carefully, would you say this corn resembles the extinct varieties you mentioned? Sarah zoomed in on the survey photo, her eyes widening. Those are definitely heritage genetics. The stalk structure, the ear formation, the color. My God, where did these come from? A garden in Oakland, Julian said. His mind was racing, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. A garden maintained by a woman named Elena Vance, whose grandfather was George Vance. He pulled up his phone and searched the name, something he should have done hours ago. Results flooded the screen, most of them obituaries and historical references. George Vance, agricultural scientist, died 2023, age 94. Worked for USDA in the 1950s before a gap in the record. Nearly a decade with no publications, no employment history. Then reappearance in California in the early 1960s, working quietly in urban agriculture and soil conservation. Julian's blood ran cold as he read further. George Vance had fled to Mexico in 1954, spent years in a remote Oaxacan village. Developed drought-resistant corn varieties. Was eventually forced to return to the United States by government pressure. The same village. The same timeline. The same man his father had called the Black Angel. And that man's granddaughter had been growing the rarest, most valuable grain on earth in a garden Julian was planning to bulldoze in 3 weeks. Cancel tomorrow's meetings, Julian said quietly. Sarah, I need a full analysis of what that purple corn could be worth if it's genuine heritage stock. Marcus, get me everything you can find on George Vance. Publications, patents, legal filings, everything. And someone get me the legal team. Now. As his staff scattered to follow orders, Julian returned to the window, his reflection now showing something harder than exhaustion. Calculation. Strategy. He'd told Elena Vance that everything was replaceable, that her garden was just in the way of progress. But he'd been wrong. That garden wasn't an obstacle. It was the answer to everything. The solution that would save his company, vindicate his agri-tech division, and make Vega global billions. He didn't need to destroy Elena's garden. He needed to own it. By dawn, Julian had his strategy. The legal team had found gaps in the property deed, unclear succession from George Vance to his granddaughter, missing documentation, the kind of vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They draft an offer that seemed generous but was actually pennies compared to the corn's true value. Present it to the naive young waitress who didn't understand what she possessed. And if she refused? Well, there were other ways. Eminent domain. Environmental violations. Code enforcement. 100 bureaucratic weapons that could force her hand. Julian told himself he was being practical. This was business. This was survival. He almost believed it. But in the back of his mind, his father's words echoed, "You have made a terrible mistake tonight, Miho." Julian pushed the thought away and reached for his phone. It was time to pay Elena Vance another visit. The black sedan pulled up to the garden's chain-link fence just after sunset, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Elena, who'd spent the entire day reading her grandfather's journals and carefully transplanting seedlings, looked up from her work with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She recognized the car. Recognized the way the driver, one of the security guards from the gala, stepped out first, scanning the area. And when Julian Vega emerged from the back seat, flanked by two people in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases, Elena understood exactly what this was. This was the end. Or the beginning. She wasn't sure which. Julian approached the gate, his expression unreadable. He'd traded his tuxedo for casual businessman attire, dark jeans, white button-down, a jacket that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Trying to look approachable, Elena thought. Trying to seem less threatening. It wasn't working. "Miss Vance," he called out. "May we speak? I promise, no security this time. Just conversation." Elena wiped her dirt-stained hands on her jeans and walked to the gate. She didn't open it. "You've come to offer me money for my garden." Julian's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised that she'd guessed, or perhaps approval of her directness. "I've come to offer you a solution. May we come in?" Against her better judgment, Elena unlocked the gate. The four of them entered her sanctuary, and she saw Julian's eyes sweeping across the garden with new appreciation. The purple corn stood tall in the evening light, their silk catching the last rays of sun like threads of gold. "This is remarkable," one of the suited lawyers murmured. A woman with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. "Much more extensive than the survey photos suggested." "My grandfather spent 40 years building this," Elena said quietly. "Every plant here has a purpose. A history." Julian walked to the nearest corn stalk, reaching out to touch a leaf with surprising gentleness. "I owe you an apology, Miss Vance. Last night I was harsh. Unfair. I reacted badly to a situation I didn't understand." "And now you understand?" Elena couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Now I understand that your grandfather was brilliant," Julian said, turning to face her. "And that this garden represents something irreplaceable. Which is why I'm here to make you an offer that honors that legacy." The male lawyer, older, with silver hair and an expensive watch, pulled documents from his briefcase. "We've prepared a purchase agreement. Vega Global will acquire this property for $250,000, well above market value for this area. You'll have 60 days to relocate any plants you wish to keep. We'll even provide assistance with the relocation costs." Elena stared at the papers he held out. $250,000. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to pay off her student loans, find a new place, maybe even go back to school full-time. It was also a fraction of what this garden was actually worth. "And what will Vega Global do with the land?" she asked, though she already knew. "Develop it," Julian said smoothly. "The housing project I mentioned. Affordable units for working families. A genuine contribution to the community. But all lies wrapped in philanthropic language. Elena had spent the day researching Vega Global's agri-tech division, reading about their failed grain project, understanding exactly why Julian Vega was standing in her garden making offers. "You don't want the land," she said quietly. "You want the corn." The lawyers exchanged glances. Julian's jaw tightened, but to his credit, he didn't deny it. "We want to preserve your grandfather's legacy," he said carefully. "To continue his research, share these remarkable plants with the world. Think of how many people could benefit from drought-resistant grain. Think of the good it could do." "Under Vega Global's patent," Elena said, "with your company's profit margin. We would compensate you fairly. $250,000 for a grain variety that could be worth billions?" Elena's voice hardened. "That's not fair compensation. That's theft dressed up in legal paperwork." The female lawyer smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Miss Vance, I don't think you understand the complexity of your situation. The property deed has irregularities. The succession from your grandfather to you is poorly documented. There are zoning violations, unpaid property taxes, environmental concerns about water usage. We could tie this up in court for years. Or you could take a generous offer and walk away with dignity." Elena felt her hands shake with rage. This was it, the trap her grandfather had feared. The powerful coming to take what he'd built, using lawyers and bureaucracy as weapons. She was about to refuse, about to tell them to leave, when headlights appeared at the gate. Another black sedan, this one larger. More official. The driver's door opened, and Elena's breath caught as Don Alfonso Vega stepped out, moving with surprising steadiness despite his cane. He was dressed simply, slacks and a sweater, but carried himself with undeniable authority. "Father." Julian's voice held shock and something that might have been dread. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you from making the worst mistake of your life," Don Alfonso said calmly. He walked through the gate and into the garden, his eyes sweeping across the corn with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Wonder. Recognition. "You shouldn't be here," Julian said, recovering his composure. "This is a business matter. Go home, let the doctors—" "I am not sick," Don Alfonso interrupted, his voice sharp. "I was heartbroken. There's a difference. But standing here, in George's garden, seeing what he preserved." The old man's voice cracked. "This is medicine. This is healing." He turned to Elena, extending his hand. "May I walk with you, child?" Elena took his hand and led him deeper into the garden. Behind them, Julian and his lawyers stood frozen, unsure how to proceed. Don Alfonso stopped beside the tallest corn stalks, running his weathered fingers along a purple ear. "This is it," he whispered. "The sacred grain. Exactly as I remember. George succeeded. He kept it alive." "Don Alfonso," Elena said quietly, pulling the small leather pouch from her jacket pocket. "My grandfather left me these. And documents. Legal protections he filed in Mexico." She poured seeds into the old man's palm, and watched tears stream down his face. "The people's patent," Don Alfonso breathed. "He told me he would file it, but I never knew if he succeeded. After the government took him, we never heard." He looked up at Elena with fierce pride. "Do you understand what this means? Your grandfather named his heirs as guardians. You own this variety, legally and completely. My son cannot touch it." Julian had approached close enough to hear. "Father, you don't understand modern agricultural law." "I understand theft," Don Alfonso said coldly. "I understand that you came here to steal from the granddaughter of the man who saved my life. Our family's wealth began with George's generosity, with the crops he saved. And you would repay that debt by destroying his legacy?" "This is business," Julian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is betrayal." Don Alfonso turned to Elena. "Show him the documents." Elena pulled out her phone, displaying photos of her grandfather's legal filings. The people's patent, filed in Mexico City, 1961. Clear language naming George Vance and his legitimate heirs in perpetuity as sole guardians of the Oaxacan purple variety. Transfer of living plant material or seeds prohibited without written consent of the guardians. It was airtight. Unassailable. Julian's face went pale as he read. This can't be enforceable. It's Mexican law, the female lawyer said quietly, pulling up something on her own phone. And Mexico is party to the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. If this variety originated there, if the patent was properly filed. She looked at Julian with something like pity. Sir, we can't touch this. Any attempt to acquire the seeds without consent would violate international law. The male lawyer nodded grimly. And given your company's previous environmental violations, any legal challenge would bring unwanted scrutiny. The board would never approve. Julian stood silent, his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. Elena watched emotions flicker across his face. Anger, frustration, and finally something that might have been respect. You played me, he said to Elena. Let me come here, make my offer, knowing the whole time you had legal protection. I didn't play you, Elena said quietly. I was going to sign your papers. I was actually reaching for the pen when your father arrived. She met his eyes steadily. I'm not sophisticated like you, Mr. Vega. I'm not good at corporate warfare. I was just trying to survive. But my grandfather was smarter than both of us. He knew men like you would come eventually. And he protected his life's work the only way he could. Don Alfonso squeezed her shoulder. George protected his heir. He gave you weapons you didn't even know you had. The old man looked at his son. She is not your enemy, Julian. She is your salvation, if you're wise enough to see it. The garden fell silent except for the rustle of corn leaves in the evening breeze. Julian's lawyer stood awkwardly by the gate, clearly uncertain whether to stay or leave. Don Alfonso remained beside Elena, his hands still resting on her shoulder like a benediction. Julian looked between them, his father's tear-stained face, Elena's quiet dignity, the purple corn standing like silent witnesses to a debt 65 years overdue, and something inside him cracked. Dismiss the lawyers, he said quietly. Sir, the female lawyer protested. We haven't finished. We're finished. Julian's voice was firm. Go back to the office. Draft termination papers for the Oakland demolition project. I want them on my desk by morning. The lawyers exchanged glances but knew better than to argue. They gathered their briefcases and left, the sedan's engine fading into the Oakland night. Alone now except for the security driver waiting by the car, Julian walked deeper into the garden. He touched a tomato plant, examined the careful irrigation system Elena had rigged from recycled materials, studied the companion planting his agri-tech team could have learned from if they'd bothered to look beyond their laboratories. My father tells me George Vance saved his village, Julian said, not looking at Elena. Saved his sister's life. Gave them hope when the world had abandoned them. He paused. I built my career on innovation. On disruption. On the idea that new technology could solve old problems. But standing here, seeing what your grandfather built with patience and wisdom instead of genetic engineering and venture capital. His voice trailed off. Don Alfonso moved to stand beside his son. George taught me that the earth doesn't need us to improve it. It needs us to listen to it. To work with it, not against it. I wasn't listening, Julian admitted. I was so focused on the demolition timeline, the investor presentations, the quarterly projections, that I didn't see what was right in front of me. He turned to Elena. Your grandfather created something my entire division failed to engineer with $80 million and 3 years of research. And I almost destroyed it because I was too arrogant to recognize genius when it didn't come from a laboratory. Elena watched him carefully, trying to gauge whether this transformation was genuine or just another strategy. What are you saying, Mr. Vega? I'm saying I was wrong. Julian's voice was steady now, carrying a conviction that sounded real. About the demolition. About you. About what matters. He looked at his father. You said I'd made a terrible mistake. You were right. Don Alfonso's weathered hand found his son's shoulder. The measure of a man is not whether he makes mistakes, mi hijo. It's whether he has the courage to correct them. Julian nodded slowly, then knelt, in the garden dirt, his expensive genes pressing into the earth Elena had tended for years. He picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers the way Don Alfonso had described George doing decades ago. "This soil is alive," Julian said, almost to himself. "I've read reports about dead earth, depleted nutrients, chemical dependency. But this..." He looked up at Elena. "How?" "My grandfather taught me that soil isn't just dirt," Elena said softly, kneeling beside him. "It's an ecosystem. Bacteria, fungi, minerals, organic matter all working together." He used compost, cover crops, natural amendments. He built this soil over 40 years, layer by layer. She picked up her own handful, holding it beside Julian's. "This is what your agri-tech division is missing. You can't engineer life in a lab and expect it to thrive in dead earth. You have to heal the foundation first." Julian stared at the soil in his palm, and Elena saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Not just intellectual understanding, but something deeper. The kind of wisdom that comes from genuine humility. "I want to help," Julian said. "Not acquire. Not purchase. Preserve this garden, expand your grandfather's research, share it with the world the right way." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "But only if you want to. Only with your consent and partnership. This is your legacy, Miss Vance. I have no right to take it from you." Don Alfonso smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "There's my son. There is the boy who used to ask George endless questions about why the corn grew tall." Elena felt tears prickling her eyes. "You remember my grandfather?" "Every day of my life," Don Alfonso said. "He was the first person who treated me like my questions mattered, who believed a poor indigenous boy could understand science." The old man's voice strengthened. "George didn't just save our bodies with his corn. He saved our spirits by showing us we were worthy of knowledge, of dignity, of respect." Julian pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "I'm sending messages to the board. The Oakland project is cancelled. The East District stays as it is." He looked at Elena. "But I'd like to propose something else. Not a purchase. A partnership. The Vance Vega Research Institute. You'd be the director, with full control over your grandfather's varieties and research. Vega Global would provide funding, facilities, whatever you need. But the work would belong to you, to the legacy your grandfather built." "And your company?" Elena asked carefully. "Your failed agri-tech division?" "We'll learn from you," Julian said simply. "If you're willing to teach us. Not how to steal what George created, but how to approach agriculture the way he did, with respect, patience, and genuine care for the earth." Elena looked at Don Alfonso, searching his face for guidance. The old man smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said softly. "He always believed that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. But shared on your terms, with your control. If my son honors that, truly honors it, then perhaps some good can come from all this pain." Julian extended his hand to Elena, and she saw it was still stained with garden dirt. "Partners?" he asked. "Not employer and employee. Not buyer and seller. Equals working towards something George Vance would approve of." Elena thought of her grandfather's final letter. "You are not just a gardener. You are a guardian of something precious." She took Julian's hand, her own just as dirty, and shook it firmly. "Partners," she agreed. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "This garden stays exactly as it is. No development, no displacement, no compromise." "Done." "The community gets access. Free workshops on urban farming, soil health, seed saving. This knowledge belongs to everyone, not just the wealthy." "Absolutely." "And your father," Elena said, looking at Don Alfonso with warmth, "gets to visit whenever he wants. To remember. To teach me the stories my grandfather never told." Don Alfonso's eyes filled with tears again. "It would be my honor, child." Julian smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him, and it transformed his face from cold businessman to someone almost human. "Anything else?" "Yes," Elena said. "Fire those lawyers. They're terrible." Julian laughed, the sound surprising all of them. "Already done," As the three of them stood in the garden beneath the rising moon, surrounded by purple corn that had survived racism, government appropriation, decades of corporate agriculture, and nearly been destroyed by Julian's own arrogance, Elena felt something shift in the world. Her grandfather's legacy wasn't just surviving. It was finally being honored the way it deserved. 1 year later, the garden had transformed. Not in its essence. The purple corn still grew in the same careful rows, the companion plants still flourished, the soil still thrived with the life George Vance had spent decades cultivating. But around it, everything had changed. The chain-link fence was gone, replaced by beautiful natural fencing that welcomed rather than excluded. The small shed had become a state-of-the-art research facility that somehow felt humble, designed to blend with the garden rather than dominate it. Greenhouses stretched along the northern edge, filled with seedlings that would spread George's legacy across the country. And at the garden's heart, a new pavilion stood where Elena taught workshops that were always full, always free, always focused on empowerment rather than profit. Tonight, that pavilion hosted a feast. The guest list would have seemed impossible a year ago. Silicon Valley's tech elite sitting alongside Oakland community members, venture capitalists sharing tables with urban farmers, board members from Vega Global laughing with local students who'd learned soil science through Elena's programs. The centerpiece of every table was food made from the purple corn, tortillas, tamales, pozole, cornbread, dishes that honored both Mexican tradition and African-American soul food heritage. The grain that had saved a village in 1956 was now feeding people across multiple communities, its deep purple color a reminder of resilience and survival. Elena moved through the crowd in a dress that wasn't a uniform, greeting guests who now knew her name. She was no longer invisible. The director of the Vance Vega Research Institute, a title that still felt surreal, commanded respect that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with knowledge and integrity. Elena! A young woman approached, her eyes bright with excitement. The test results from the Sacramento plots came back. The purple corn yielded 30% higher than the commercial varieties, even in the drought conditions. "That's wonderful, Maria," Elena said warmly. "Can you compile that data for the quarterly report? The USDA representatives will want to see it." As Maria hurried off, Julian appeared at Elena's elbow, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Your grandfather's corn is officially outperforming every engineered variety on the market. The board is terrified and impressed in equal measure." Elena accepted the wine with a smile. Julian had changed over the past year, still driven, still intense, but with a humility that made him actually bearable to work with. He'd fired his entire original agri-tech team and rebuilt it with people who understood that innovation sometimes meant honoring old wisdom rather than inventing new shortcuts. "How's your father?" Elena asked. Julian's expression softened. "See for yourself." He gestured toward the pavilion center, where Don Alfonso sat surrounded by children from the community garden program. The old man was demonstrating how to braid corn husks, his weathered hands moving with practiced grace while young voices asked endless questions. "He's teaching them the old language," Julian said quietly. "The dialect you spoke that night. Says it's important they understand where the knowledge comes from." Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest. Don Alfonso visited the garden 3 times a week now, always bringing stories, always sharing memories of George Vance. The children adored him, and he'd found new purpose in passing on traditions he'd thought died with his generation. "He's happier than I've seen him in years," Julian admitted. "Maybe ever. Turns out building things is more fulfilling than just accumulating wealth." "Who knew?" "My grandfather knew," Elena said gently. "Yes," Julian agreed. "He did." A bell chimed, calling everyone to take their seats. Elena moved to the head table where Don Alfonso waited, patting the chair beside him. "Come out. Sit with an old man while he embarrasses himself with a speech." Elena sat, and the crowd quieted. Don Alfonso stood slowly, leaning on his cane but standing tall, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. 70 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the pavilion, "A black man appeared in my village when we were dying. He brought seeds and knowledge, but more than that, he brought dignity. He treated us like we mattered when the rest of the world had decided we didn't. The old man's eyes found Elena's. George Vance saved my life with a bowl of corn porridge. But he did more than that. He showed me that wisdom comes from unexpected places, that genius doesn't care about skin color or nationality or social class. He taught me that the greatest legacy we can leave isn't wealth or power, but knowledge shared freely with those who need it. Don Alfonso gestured around the pavilion. Tonight, we eat food from the seeds George protected for 70 years. We sit in a garden his granddaughter tends with the same care he showed. We celebrate not just survival, but transformation. From fear to hope. From scarcity to abundance. From isolation to community. He raised his glass. To George Vance. To his granddaughter Elena, who carries his wisdom forward. And to the understanding that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in soil health, in full bellies, in knowledge preserved and shared, and in communities that lift each other up rather than tear each other down. To George Vance, the crowd echoed, glasses raised. As everyone began eating, Elena felt Don Alfonso's hand find hers under the table. He would be proud, the old man whispered. So very proud. Later, as the feast wound down and guests began departing, Elena and Don Alfonso walked together through the garden rows. The moon was full, casting silver light across the purple corn silk, and the city sounds faded to a gentle hum. Do you remember the words, child? Don Alfonso asked. The full blessing? Ti penolsha, tlatsin? Kenk amo tlacua in tlaltepactli. Elena recited softly. Yes, but there's more. George learned the full prayer. The old man stopped, placed his weathered hand on a corn stalk, and began speaking in the ancient dialect, the words flowing like water over stone. Elena listened, committing each syllable to memory, and when Don Alfonso finished, she repeated it back. The language of the stone and the seed. The language her grandfather had preserved so it wouldn't die completely. Perfect, Don Alfonso said, tears shining in his eyes. You sound exactly like him. They stood together in the garden that had survived everything the world threw at it, surrounded by purple corn that carried in its genes the story of resilience, of cross-cultural connection, of one man's quiet revolution against hatred and greed. Above them, stars wheeled in the Oakland sky. Below them, the soil thrived. And between, in the space where legacy meets possibility, where the past informs the future without constraining it, Elena Vance stood as guardian of something precious. Not just seeds, not just knowledge, but hope itself, growing purple and strong in the earth her grandfather had healed. The garden would endure. The stories would be told. And somewhere, Elena knew George Vance was smiling. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let us know in the comments what part resonated with you the most. Was it Elena's courage? Don Alfonso's loyalty to an old friend? Or the beautiful way heritage and hope can survive against all odds? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do that now so you never miss stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.